Wow, okay. Some of you sent in some really wild stuff this week. But this one really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah.
A massive underground city, 10 times the size of the pyramids themselves and stretching over 6,500 feet.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty mind-blowing when you hear that for the first time.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're diving into today.
That's right.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I'm your host,
I'm the expert.
and we are here to break down this pretty stunning claim about a potential hidden city beneath the pyramids of Giza.
A hidden city, a subterranean metropolis, if you will.
Now, we've got some great sources to work with this week. Looks like we've got articles from Egypt Independent and the Daily Mail Online, and even a YouTube video transcript from First Post.
A really diverse set of perspectives there.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating, right? We're getting these different angles, these different interpretations of the same story.
Totally. And it gives us a chance to kind of wade through it all and figure out, what's really going on.
Exactly. So today we're going to unpack these claims, examine the evidence being presented, and really try to understand the reactions from the archaeological community, because there's definitely some skepticism out there.
Oh, yeah, there's quite a bit of pushback.
So let's start with the basics. Where is this claim coming from? Who are the researchers making this bold assertion?
Right. So the Egypt Independent article tells us that this is coming from a team of researchers based in Italy and Scotland.
Okay, Italy and Scotland, interesting mix.
Yeah, and they're the ones who are saying that there's this huge underground city right under the Giza pyramids.
A huge underground city. Okay, so we're not talking about like a small chamber or a hidden tunnel.
No, we're talking about something much more extensive.
Now the Daily Mail, they go even further. They talk about these massive wells and chambers, thousands of feet tall, specifically under the Khafre pyramid.
That's the one next to the Great Pyramid, right?
That's right. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. The researchers, they're expressing a really high level of confidence in their findings, something like 85% sure that these structures exist.
85%. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's not just throwing out a wild theory. They seem pretty convinced.
Right, and a big part of that confidence comes from the technology they're using, these pulse radar devices.
Pulse radar. Okay, so how does that work?
Well, the Egypt Independent piece explains it pretty well. They compare it to sonar radar. You know how they use sonar to map the ocean floor?
Right, they send out sound waves and then measure how they bounce back.
Exactly. It's similar with pulse radar. They send out these pulses of electromagnetic energy into the ground, and then they analyze how those pulses are reflected back.
So they're essentially creating like a three-dimensional image of what's beneath the surface.
Precisely. And based on these images, they're claiming to have detected these massive structures, these wells, these chambers, this potential city.
Okay, so they've got these radar images. What exactly are they seeing that leads them to this conclusion of an underground city? Are they seeing like outlines of buildings or streets or what?
Well, it's not quite that clear cut. The Daily Mail mentions that the radar showed these high-intensity reflections, which the researchers interpret as structured discontinuities.
Structure discontinuities. Okay, that sounds pretty technical.
It is basically they're saying that the radar signals are bouncing back in a way that suggests there are distinct man-made features down there, not just natural rock formations.
So they're seeing patterns that suggest construction that suggests something was built there.
Exactly. And one of the researchers, Nicole Sokol, she goes into a bit more detail.
Okay, what does she say?
Well, she talks about how they've identified this well that extends really deep underground and how the radar signal changes at different depths within that well.
Different depths, maybe different levels or chambers.
That's their interpretation. They're saying that those signal variations could indicate different materials or even separate compartments at various points within the well.
So it's not just like one big empty space. It's more complex than that.
Right. And then there's this other feature that really caught my eye. They call it a helical feature.
Helical, like a spiral.
Exactly. The Daily Mail quotes them as saying that it aligns with descriptions of spiral descending shafts that have been found in other ancient Egyptian structures.
Like what kind of structures?
Well, the article mentions the Pyramid of Unas and some Middle Kingdom tombs.
Okay, so these kinds of spiral shafts, they're not unheard of in ancient Egyptian architecture.
Right. And even Professor Conyers, who we'll talk about later, he agrees that these kinds of shafts do exist in other sites.
Okay, so there's at least some agreement on that point.
Yeah, but here's where things get really interesting. The researchers are claiming that these shafts and these enclosures, They're around 38,000 years old.
38,000 years old. Wait a minute. The pyramids themselves are only about 4,500 years old, right?
That's right. There's a massive difference in timescale here.
So how are they arriving at such an incredibly old age for these structures? I mean,
Huh.
how do you even date something like that using radar?
Well, it's not actually the radar data itself that's giving them that age. That 38,000-year figure is closely tied to their interpretation of ancient texts and their idea of a lost civilization.
Ah, the lost civilization theory. Okay, this is where things start to get a little more speculative.
A little bit, yeah.
So how are they connecting these ancient texts to these underground structures?
Well, the Daily Mail explains that they're looking at texts like Chapter 149 of the Book of the Dead, which describes 14 dwellings of the divine.
14 dwellings of the divine. Okay.
And they're interpreting that as evidence of this advanced civilization that existed long before the dynastic Egyptians.
So they're saying that those dwellings, those could be references to these underground structures?
Possibly, they're also looking at the Turin King list, which mentions gods and demigods ruling before the first pharaohs.
Gods and demigods ruling before the pharaohs. Okay.
And they're suggesting that those figures might have been actual rulers from this much earlier forgotten civilization.
So they're building this whole narrative around this idea that there was this advanced society thousands of years before ancient Egypt as we know it.
Right, and that these underground structures
Right.
are the remnants of that lost civilization.
Okay, so but how does the 38,000-year figure come into play?
Well, they're not directly dating the radar anomalies themselves. They're using that time frame to support their theory
Yeah.
about this lost civilization.
So it's all connected. It's all part of this grand narrative they're constructing.
Exactly, and they even go so far as to propose a cataclysmic event that wiped out this civilization.
A cataclysmic event like what?
Well, they mentioned the theory of a large asteroid impact around 13,500 years ago.
An asteroid impact. Wow.
And
Wow.
they suggest that this impact caused global climate change, mass extinctions, and ultimately the destruction of this advanced culture.
So they're weaving together these ancient texts, these radar images, and this theory of a catastrophic event.
Right? They're trying to create a complete picture of this lost civilization and its demise.
It's certainly a compelling story, but as we mentioned earlier, not everyone is buying it.
No, not at all. In
They-
fact, there's a lot of pushback from the archaeological community.
Okay, so what are the main criticisms? What are the experts saying?
Well, one of the most vocal critics is Hussein Abdul Basir. He's the former Director General of the Giza Pyramids area.
Okay, so he's a pretty authoritative figure in the field of Egyptology.
Absolutely. And he's quoted in the Egypt Independent article saying that this study lacks the most basic standards of proper scientific research.
Strong words.
He's not holding back. He emphasizes that real archaeological discoveries need to be published in peer-reviewed scientific journals.
Peer-reviewed journals. Okay, so other experts can scrutinize the findings.
Exactly. And he points out that so far all we've seen is a press conference and a press release. There's no scientific paper published in a reputable journal, and there's been no official announcement from the Egyptian authorities.
So essentially he's saying that until there's more rigorous scientific backing, these claims should be treated with a lot of caution.
That's right. He's essentially saying, let's see the evidence before we jump to any conclusions.
And what about Professor Conyers, the radar expert? What does he have to say?
Well, he has some pretty strong criticisms, too, especially about the way the researchers are presenting their data.
Oh, okay, like what specifically?
Well, he takes issue with those correlation confidence levels that they're touting, that 85 to 90% certainty.
Right, they seem very confident in their findings.
But Conyers points out that in order to have correlation confidence levels, there needs to be something to correlate to, something to compare to.
Something to compare, so like a baseline or a benchmark.
Exactly. And he's saying that without that, those percentages are meaningless scientifically.
So their claims of certainty, they're not really grounded in solid scientific methodology.
Not according to Conyers. He's also very skeptical of that 38,000-year-old claim. He calls it really outlandish.
Outlandish. Okay, so he's not mincing words either.
Nope. He brings up the fact that 38,000 years ago, humans were mostly living in caves. They hadn't even started building cities yet.
So the idea that a sophisticated civilization was constructing massive underground complexes at that time, it just doesn't fit with our understanding of human history.
Exactly. And the first post YouTube transcript raises another important point. It mentions that other methods like gravimetry and muon tomography haven't found any evidence of an underground city.
Gravimetry and muon tomography. Okay, those are other ways of looking beneath the surface, right?
Right. There are established techniques for subsurface investigation, And they haven't detected anything like what the researchers are claiming.
So essentially, the consensus from the experts seems to be that these claims are exaggerated, they lack scientific rigor, and they might even be based on a misinterpretation of the radar data.
That's a pretty fair summary.
So it sounds like the mainstream archaeological world is pretty dismissive of this whole thing.
Yeah, for the most part, they're saying extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so far, that evidence is lacking.
But the first post transcript does offer a different perspective, right? Kind of a devil's advocate point of view.
That's right. It acknowledges the excitement around the possibility of a hidden city and even brings up the legend of the Hall of Records.
The Hall of Records, oh yeah, that's that mythical repository of ancient knowledge that some people believe exists somewhere.
Right, and the transcript also reminds us that sometimes groundbreaking discoveries are initially met with resistance from the establishment.
So it's like that idea that maybe, just maybe, the researchers are onto something, even if the mainstream experts aren't convinced yet.
It's that glimmer of possibility that keeps these kinds of theories alive.
Right. It's that sense of wonder and mystery that draws us to these stories.
And let's be honest, the pyramids themselves are such enigmatic structures that the idea of them holding even more secrets is incredibly captivating.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think the main point is that we have this clash between a group of researchers making a very bold claim based on their interpretation of radar data
Yeah.
and a skeptical archaeological community that's demanding more rigorous scientific evidence.
Right. It's a classic case of extraordinary claims versus the need for extraordinary evidence.
Exactly. And until that evidence is provided, I think it's important to approach these claims with a healthy dose of skepticism.
But at the same time, it's also important to stay curious, right? To keep an open mind to the possibility that there's still so much we don't know about the past.
Absolutely. I mean, the pyramids have been standing for thousands of years.
Hmm.
Who knows what secrets they might still be hiding?
And who knows what future technologies might allow us to uncover those secrets.
That's a great point. I mean, think about all the advances we've made in archaeology and imaging technology in just the last few decades.
It's mind-boggling to think what we might be able to discover in the future.
And I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It's that blend of scientific inquiry and human curiosity that drive us to explore the unknown.
Absolutely. And I think it also speaks to our enduring fascination with lost civilizations and the idea that there are still mysteries out there waiting to be solved.
Yeah, and maybe that's something for our listeners to ponder, is that desire to uncover lost knowledge. Is it driving force behind both legitimate scientific research and the allure of these more speculative theories?
It's definitely something to think about. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.